Hey, son, I feel like Lewis Hamilton. I need a nap. It's the dog days of summer here. And we are, 10 races in? I'm not sure. I've lost count. Anyway, that was a good race in Barcelona. There won't be many there, but that was a good one. Max, maybe not in the best car, but he wins once again. Lando comes up a bit short. Are you ready to go, son?
I am ready to go.
Hello, welcome to Hard Compound, the American take on Formula One. We just finished watching Spanish Grand Prix in Barcelona. Max, Lando, and Lewis. It was a good race. Patrick, son, let me get your thoughts on the Spanish Grand Prix 2024.
Spanish Grand Prix, more or less the start of the European campaign. They used to do preseason testing in Barcelona. All these drivers are very familiar with it. But with Mercedes coming up now, we are getting some battles, some good fights. We saw that in this race. I didn't see all of it, but I saw the most important parts, the start and the finish. And in both of those, start and finish of the race, we saw some intense fights, lots of interesting battles happening, lots of different drivers, different cars getting in the mix. And I think this is sort of an embodiment of what this season has been like so far. Just fun, exciting racing. Max working a little harder than he had to last year for some of these wins and podiums. Lando looking like he can challenge for that, top driver position currently on the grid. And Lewis is getting back into form. Seems like Mercedes has figured it out a little bit. And Lewis is seeing that and saying, I want to get on the podium myself too. So he finally got back up there.
He did. It's been a while for Lewis, but he's back on the podium. It was a tough win. The old man needed a nap after making it on the podium. So I'm wondering what these 3 races in a row, how that's going to play out if he can hang with the younger guys. But once again, Max, maybe not in the best car, but he gets a win. We now have every race now. I think we can reliably say there are 4 teams that can not just get on the podium, but even win. So we have Red Bull with Max, Mercedes with Lewis and George. We've got McLaren with Lando, maybe Oscar, and we have Ferrari. Ferrari's an interesting case study because they've got a good car, a good team, but Carlos, they don't want him. They're bringing in Lewis next year, and there seems to be some squabbles there, some resentment. Lewis and Carlos, I think, almost coming to blows. What do we think of that?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think Carlos is a very nice young man. And I think he's usually a very polite driver and he's fast. But we're getting pretty well into this season. And he found out the very start of the season, just before, we don't want you, Carlos. He goes, what did I do wrong? I have been a loyal servant and fast for this team my whole time here. I compete with Charles, but we don't go over the line. There's really no reason that you would need to get rid of me. But Ferrari's bringing in Lewis Hamilton. There's a case that Hamilton will do more for Ferrari than Carlos is currently. I think we're getting in well into the season now. Carlos still doesn't have a team, a seat for next year. Obviously, I think it's fair to say he more than likely will have a seat at some point. I just don't know, or I imagine that's becoming stressful and frustrating and just overall annoying for him. And I think he's kind of fed up with it. And I'm sure that him taking out his frustrations is probably either going to be on his teammate Charles Leclerc or Lewis Hamilton. And what's better for Ferrari is going up against Lewis Hamilton and trying to fight him a little bit harder than fighting your teammate. So it's fun to see. I think it'll be really interesting next year to see, especially if Sainz is in a good car, how that plays out. But this is definitely a talking point so far throughout this season, and it's going to continue to be until Sainz actually signs somewhere else. No pun intended.
So we have Max versus everybody. We have, once again, Ferrari versus Ferrari. But what about McLaren? Lando could have won. Do we think it was Lando's mistakes or was it McLaren's strategy? Because Lando took blame for not getting the win. But I think that late pit stop, I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, I think Lando is pretty hard on himself. And I think if he is in the Red Bull, he wins pretty much just as often as Max does. I think it's been hard for him to really push that car to its absolute limits, and it's still just not quite there. He finally got over the hump in Miami, won. This race, though, he kind of had it in the bag. He did muff the start a little bit and pushed Max to the inside. There really wasn't great grip for Lando, and then George kind of squeezed him because Russell had an awesome start.
He
was
did.
really, really good.
That was.
And ended up, I think, squeezing Lando. And so he wound up in third instead of in second, potentially just behind Max. And I think that really kind of screwed him at the beginning of the race. But all of that said, with like 15 laps to go, he was in first place. 15, 20 seconds ahead of Max. Now, I don't know exactly what the lap times were on his old medium tires versus what Max was doing on his soft tires by the end of the race. But I have to imagine, well, for me in particular, I believe track position is generally more important than being on the right tires, especially if you have a car that is pretty much equally as competitive. And I was pretty frustrated with McLaren for bringing in Lando that late and swapping onto the same tires that Verstappen had on and pretty much forcing Lando to be the one to chase. I guess I'll put it this way. I think McLaren could have forced Verstappen to have an incredible race, do something awesome, and win, which he's more than capable of. But instead, they allowed him just to waltz up there and have a pretty easy drive to the finish line. I think when it comes down to it, you have to force the other team, the other driver, to actually get the most out of their car. And McLaren did not do that.
Yeah, good point. Lewis got on a podium once again. I think this might be the 18th year in a row. Every season, I think. George came in fourth. Is Mercedes for real? I think they are finally. The exception is, it's not just the driver and the car. It's the entire team. And look at what Mercedes did to George. I mean, they didn't sabotage his race, but I mean, it was a 5+ second pit stop that basically cost him a spot on the podium. Mm-hmm. But, that aside, I mean, Mercedes still has issues to fix, obviously, but do we think Mercedes is for real? Do we think they'll be fighting for podiums the rest of the season, the way we assume Red Bull, Ferrari, and McLaren will?
It seems like they will. Seems like the last two tracks, we had Montreal and now Spain. These are pretty solid tracks to understand what the actual performance is like for these cars. And it seems like Mercedes has some genuine pace. I think Mercedes has enough resources and talented engineers to continue to develop that car at a level at the pace that these other front-running teams will do. And they certainly still have talented drivers. I expect them to continue to fight for these top spots and podiums. I think it was so utterly embarrassing and disappointing, their performance early on this season. But we saw last year McLaren kind of have the same deal, maybe even worse, and it took longer for them to figure things out. But once they did, they were humming. They were doing really well, putting in really solid performances, and I kind of expect Mercedes to continue to do that. which I think bodes well for fans the rest of the season. We get to see a lot of cars and a lot of drivers competing consistently for top spots.
Competing for top spots, that's good. Back in Barcelona, Spain, that's good. A Spaniard not competing for a top spot was Fernando Alonso. Through no fault of his own, we are seeing a repeat of 2023 where the Aston it starts off well, but there are no upgrades. There is nothing they can do. And the rest of the pack just passes them up. I don't even think he made the top 10 today, did he? That's just outside. And that was just bad. I just think that's the story of Aston Martin 2023, and it's going to repeat in 2024, unfortunately. Can I get your top 5 drivers of the Spanish Grand Prix, Patrick?
Yeah, I think top 5 drivers, it's hard to pick out kind of who those top 5 are, especially with how well each of the top, let's say 4, drove today. So I think given the circumstances and his starting position and just sort of his all-around performances over the last couple of seasons, I'm going to go ahead and give Lewis Hamilton driver of the day for me. I thought he did really well. That Mercedes, just not quite as quick as the other 2 cars there, McLaren and Red Bull with Max and Lando. But he did really well. I think, Mercedes and Russell had a bit of an awkward pit stop, which gave Hamilton a little bit of an opening, but he still drove very fast, had to pass Russell near the end, was able to do that on fresher tires. And I think he just had a really solid race, solid performance. So I have Lewis. Then I'll give it to Max. He just continues to show how good and consistent he is. I believe, and I think most people on the grid seem to still believe, that the Red Bull overall has the best race day pace, albeit it's much, much closer between some of these teams than it has been the last couple of seasons. But Max just continues to show how good he is and how important he is to that team. And it really doesn't matter what Sergio Perez does. Red Bull will still be getting a good chunk of points, usually at least 25, from Max every single race. Then I got to give it to Lando. Awesome qualifying performance. Really tough start of the race. Got held up by George there the first few laps. But put himself in a position to win this race. I think ultimately the wrong decision near the end to pit him. But, you would still kind of hope that he could push really hard and reel Max in to make it a fight by the end. He just didn't quite pull that off. So I have him third. Then I think we got to give George Russell props. He's, racing with this Mercedes with these upgrades. They've been really good. He's been pushing Lewis. Lewis has been pushing him. I think he's showing that, he's a very solid, very capable driver. I think we all knew that, but we also believe he had some struggles and some things that he needed to work on. I think right now he's looking like, one of the top 5 drivers out here in the last couple of races. And then 5th, it's hard to say for me, but I think I'm going to give it to one of the Alpine guys. I think they finally, had a pretty decent car, had some good qualifying. I'll say Ocon overall, I thought had a little bit more impressive overall weekend than Gasly, but it's kind of good to see, that team has been frustrating and annoying to watch, but good to see them, those 2 drivers at least have a little bit of pace to show.
Yeah, I think Alpine now is soared ahead of Haas in points thanks to this week. But so that's good. So you have Lewis, Max, Lando, George Russell, 3 Brits out of the top 5, and Ocon. Yeah, it was such a fun race at the front of the grid that we may not have noticed some of the action taking place in the mid and the back. But Ocon had a good race. Gasly had a good race. Hulkenberg, I thought, had a good race, although I think he made a mistake going into the pit. So that was fun. Racing Bulls looked horrible again. Magnussen looked horrible again. Williams looked irrelevant again. This is going on 20 years of irrelevance, but
I don't know if it's that long, but at least at least 10, 12 years they've been quite poor, and I think irrelevant is frankly a good word. What can you say about Williams? I didn't think about them this weekend. Yeah, that sounds about right. It's disappointing, to say the least, of a really historic team.
All right, switching to the soft compound. We've talked about Carlos Sainz a bit already. He still is not signed for next year. This seems surprising to me. It's now gone on so long that I think it has nothing to do with Audi, for example, which will take over for Sauber, wanting to have some big PR campaign, or his people wanting to time it. I think he was just expecting a good seat to open up and for him to be offered a spot, and I'm just not sure. So I don't know where he's going to go. I guess Audi next year, Sauber would be the best spot. Or I've heard Williams, though. I think if you sign with Williams, Williams has been, as we just said, they've been irrelevant for, at least a decade.
It's not worth it.
I guess he could go with Alpine because Ocon will be gone, but I'm surprised. I mean, some of these guys, Hulkenberg, he's solid. He's signed. Bottas, solid, still not signed, I don't believe. Zhou, there's no reason to keep Zhou. I don't think there's a reason to keep Ricciardo at Racing Bulls. They certainly won't keep Logan Sargent at Williams. But I am surprised. Some of these drivers like Bottas, for example, may have to wait until they know where Sainz is going to figure out who's open. But yeah, Carlos Sainz without a seat is surprising to me, don't you think?
It's surprising to me. I genuinely thought there were 2 seats available to him that made sense, and those are Red Bull and Mercedes. Red Bull decided, you know what, we don't want to piss off Max. We're just going to re-sign Perez. And frankly, I think that's a stupid decision, but means one less seat for Sainz to look at. And that's, a solid seat for a driver in his prime, very talented, proven that he can race, win races, get on the podium, will fight his teammate, but not usually in a way that costs the team anything. And I just would rather see Carlos Sainz in a Red Bull. Okay, that's off the table. Mercedes. I assume, since it seems like they're trying to change the literal rules to allow their young driver to enter Formula One, race in Formula One, that they are simply uninterested in paying however much Carlos Sainz wants, which realistically he probably should get. So yeah, like you said, what are the other options for Sainz in F1? Alpine? Honestly, who would want to move from Ferrari to Alpine when Alpine has just been in turmoil for the last 3 years?
Yeah, and they're at least 5 years from being really good, and that's hopeful.
Audi Sauber is an interesting prospect, but that could be kind of worrisome. I think right now that Kick Sauber team is not good, quite poor, and I'm not sure how much better they're going to get next year or into the future with the regulation changes coming in 2026.
Yeah, that's another 2030 project.
I'm looking at this and I'm worried that, frankly, nothing worth his time is going to open up for Carlos Sainz. And I think we might not see him in F1 next year, which I think is bad for the sport.
That would be shocking if Carlos Sainz is not in. Maybe Toto Wolff is playing his cards close to his vest. He keeps talking up the 17-year-old Kimi Antonelli. He keeps talking up how much he would love to have Max on the team. Maybe this is a bit of a dodge, and he's working to get Carlos Sainz signed up. I don't think so. So I think realistically, Carlos is going to head either to Williams or the Audi team. And I don't think those are good choices. It's funny you mentioned Kimi Antonelli, FIA saying, oh, yeah, you can bring along the 17-year-old. He can race in F1. Meanwhile, we've got veterans winning in IndyCar, guys with 10 years experience winning IndyCar that they're still not allowing in, which I just hate that anti-American bias.
It's extremely frustrating to see some of these super license rules and how obvious it is that the rules are used to pretty much keep out drivers who are not in the Formula Series. And drivers who are in the Formula Series are generally European, or they are young drivers who have big sponsors from their home countries and basically have been sort of talented enough and lucky enough to be found by these sponsors and then moved their whole families, uprooted their lives to move to Europe so that they could drive in these Formula Series. It's frustrating to see that they're sort of keeping out a lot of talent just based on that sort of bias. There's a lot of good young talent in the Americas, Canada, US, Mexico, all through Latin America that are coming up through these Indy series and that kind of thing, through different karting series in the States. I think it's really frustrating to see that they're really not being allowed to sort of showcase their talent in Formula One. I think they could. I think they could be good. I think it would be good for the sport to have a broader range of talent coming through. But I think, for now, we just have to wait and hope that somebody can break through that sort of clubbiness that is in Formula One.
Speaking of this, what we think is a pretty clear anti-American bias, IndyCar just signed a big deal with Fox Broadcasting here in the US. All the races will be shown live, I think, and on the Fox network, which is broadcast. So big potential audience. Is this short-sighted on F1's part? Watching in the US and Canada, and really a lot in Mexico, will be watching Indy races. We'll see a lot of young guys from the area racing in Indy. I don't know. This seems awfully short-sighted to me because there's just so much talent in the US and Canada and Mexico, but the FIA is set up to where it's almost impossible for them to race to ever make it into F1. We now see IndyCar becoming more popular. We also see the Andretti Cadillac bid. I was watching 24-hour LeMans last week. It was really fun. Ferrari won, but the Ford engines did quite well, and Ford is now affiliated with Red Bull going forward. But the Cadillac did quite well as well. And they're affiliated with Andretti, which is basically being locked out of F1. So, I don't know. Some of this seems awfully short-sighted.
Yeah, I agree. Formula One has made some very odd decisions in the way that they are sort of keeping, I don't even want to say traditions alive, but they are really kind of holding firm on what the current sort of scope of Formula One is. And they are sort of refusing to adapt and change. And I think that is really not going to play into their hands. I think either they are going to realize that what they are doing is short-sighted, is probably not the way that will gain them the most attention, that will provide the most enjoyable sport to watch and spectate. And they may have to change because of that. And I don't know, maybe the landscape of motorsport globally will have changed by that time. And then they won't be able to provide all these kinds of opportunities that are really being handed to them on a platter. I don't know why they're making these irrational, ridiculous decisions, but
yeah, I'm not sure European F1 fans know of both the quality of racing in the US and the Americas and just the amount of commitment there is using Indy as an example, but we could also use LeMans, the hypercars, and things like that. Toyota is committed to racing. Cadillac is committed to racing. Honda is committed to racing, spending millions of dollars in the US. So I do think some of this is short sighted. I think the long term gain to F1 for adding a team, for growing the sport in the US, for opening up the rules to make it easier for American drivers or drivers from the Americas to earn a spot in F1 based on talent as easily as a 17-year-old who I'm not sure has ever even won an F2 race. I just think that needs to be looked at. Now, different topic. We've got the new F1 game out, and I just wanted to get your quick thoughts here on what we think the driver ratings are. Do we like them? So Max gets 96 points out of 100. He gets the most. But next at 92 is Fernando Alonso. And then we've got, Charles, Lando, Carlos, Lewis, all, I think, right there, 89. Then George, Sergio, 87, and Albon. Then we have Oscar at 84. I don't know. This is, some of these, Logan Sargent is way down at 70. Zhou is way down at 80. Lance Stroll is at 80. Kevin Magnussen, 80. Yuki, though, 81. I think, he's lower than Daniel Ricciardo at 82. I'm not sure all of the inputs that EA took to generate this algorithm, but I was surprised at some of these. I wasn't surprised so much that Max was right there at the top. I'm even okay if you say, Lewis has lost a step. But I don't know. I thought some of their driver ratings were kind of weird. I especially thought some were hard to justify when you're a fan of a driver. Like, let's say you're a fan of Yuki and you want to, manage Yuki and the team. Well, he's never going to win anything. I mean, they've got him down, in Logan Sargent territory, less than Daniel Ricciardo, less than Esteban Ocon, less than Valtteri Bottas, I think. So I just thought it was kind of weird. I don't know if you've played the game yet or had any thoughts on that.
I have not played F1 24 as of yet. I do think it's a little weird, though. I mean, if you're going down the line, I think there's only, 4 metrics that they look at, right? It's like experience, pace, racecraft, awareness, or something like that. And so depending on how they rate some of those things and weight some of them, you can get kind of weird looking overall standings. And I love Fernando Alonso. I think he's a great driver. I think currently on the grid, Lando Norris is probably a better driver than Fernando Alonso.
Yeah, I do too. It's some of the stuff like experience. So you've got to give it to Alonso, then Lewis. Although, I mean, he's young, but Max has been there about 10 years. I'm just sort of, I think at some point, if you're in F1 for 10 years, that's basically, I think you're in F1 for 20 years. Just being in 11 years, 12 years, 13 years isn't going to give you any more, I don't think. That's enough races.
Yeah. I think you've gone through, probably once you hit, 100 plus races in F1, I think you're experienced enough to understand pretty much any situation that you come across.
Yeah, I don't think there's much more to gain. But then racecraft, I think you've got to go Lewis, Alonso, Max, pace. I don't know what we do on pace. Max, Lando, maybe. Yeah, what's the other?
I think Leclerc probably is up there.
Yeah,
I think awareness then is. I think it's awareness is the other one, right?
I'm not sure. That seems to me like just sort of a catch-all where you can make someone who's ever your favorite. You can sort of give them more points than maybe they deserve.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think there's 2 guys that you can look at. Maybe a couple more, right? It's Lando. I think should probably be rated second overall on the. Currently, I think he's the second best driver on the grid. Very close to Max. And I think we're seeing that in the actual races. I think Yuki being one of the bottom 5 drivers in this, I don't think that's true. I think there's at least 5, probably even up to 10 drivers that Yuki is better than. And I think that is shown in the RB's decision to re-sign him for next year. I think he's proven enough. He's a quality driver. He's fast and will generally get the most out of that car.
Yeah, I think if you look at the bottom 10, just take the current standings, maybe Albon. I'd put Albon ahead of Yuki, I think. I'd put Hulkenberg ahead of Yuki, possibly Bottas, but I'm not so sure. But I'd put Yuki up at this point now with Gasly or Ocon. I'd put him up, with Stroll, with Zhou, with Logan, with certainly with Ricardo.
Yeah.
I think he's
I think he's better than the game is giving him credit for, or ESPN or whoever is making that game is giving him credit for.
Yeah. All right, so we done been told you. We've talked about the potential strife at Ferrari when Lewis joins, because Lewis will want to be the star, but Charles will say, hey, I'm the star. But then Ferrari will say, no, the star is Ferrari. So James Allison, we talked about this a few times. James Allison, I believe he's technical director of Mercedes, went on record and said something similar. It's like, there's going to be an adjustment because Lewis wants to be the star, and at Ferrari's the star. Driver can be the star at Mercedes. Driver certainly can be the star at Red Bull. Not so much Ferrari.
Yeah, Ferrari is iconic and timeless, and I think, it's hard to separate some of the great Ferrari drivers from Ferrari even, right? Like, even if you think about Michael Schumacher, arguably the best F1 driver of all time, you think of Ferrari Michael Schumacher, right? You don't think of Mercedes Michael Schumacher. Nah, you think of Ferrari. So I more or less agree with the sentiment. I think Ferrari is iconic. It's timeless. Ferrari almost forces their drivers to be stewards of Ferrari. They are not, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. They are Ferraris, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. It's almost like here, the New York Yankees, the Dallas Cowboys, right? These are franchises where the franchise is the star. There are no players on those teams that will stand out ahead of the team itself.
Yeah, even Charles Leclerc, he's very good. We would put him in the top 5, I think, on the grid right now. But he's a company man. Mm-hmm. He's for Ferrari. Now, on a similar, we done been told you, we've been saying that the rise of Las Vegas and how good a race that is and how much potential there is for the race, for the weekend, for F1 creating an experience for F1 fans at Las Vegas, that's a direct threat to Monaco. Monaco is the race where it's all about the media and the celebrity and hype. We've been saying that's the past. We all know the race is usually not good in Monaco, but it's a fun experience. I think that's about to be eclipsed by Las Vegas. Say, oh, you're just big, loud Americans talking up America. We're not replacing Monaco, and if we do, certainly not with Las Vegas. Zach Brown has been talking up Las Vegas Grand Prix and has recently come out, Zach Brown, by the way, runs McLaren, of saying, maybe Monaco's days are numbered.
Yeah, I think everybody involved in Formula One loves Monaco. It's awesome. It's a great experience. It's historic. I would love to go to the Monaco Grand Prix. It's one of my favorite weekends on the calendar. But when you look at the whole picture, it's really not worth F1's time to go there. It really doesn't matter a whole lot, especially now that you have Vegas on the calendar. This is a race where all the teams can bring their donors out and give them a good experience, show them a good time. Same thing they do at Monaco. You can do this in Vegas. You could even do it in Miami. There are some races on the calendar in the US where they absolutely can provide what Monaco can provide and more, and give us a good race.
Yeah. The money, the media, the celebrity, the race. You're right. The US has 2 races that can eclipse, and I think do eclipse Monaco, Las Vegas and Miami. Across the line, That is our segment where we predict the winners for the next race. The next race is next week in Austria. If we predict the driver correctly, we get 1 point. If we get them in the exact right spot, we get 3 points. Once a driver is selected, he is off the board and the other person can't choose him. Patrick, what are the current standings for across the line? Do you happen to have them with you?
I do not have them with me.
Oh.
I am traveling at the moment, so I don't have my handy dandy whiteboard that I have all the results on. I think prior to this weekend, I was up maybe 7 points, something like that, but it could have all come crashing down already. I'll have to update you when I get back home, but we shall pick drivers for next week, and we'll see how we're faring after Austria.
Okay, so who do we think picks first?
I am pretty sure you pick first.
I think so. I also think so. So Austria. So Max has won the last 2 races in a row. In 2023 in Austria, he won with Charles, Sergio, and Lando close behind. So, long story short, for next week, Austria, I am going with Max Verstappen.
Very nice. That is naturally the obvious choice because I think he's shown such good pace. He is the current challenger to Max Verstappen and has now gotten himself up into P2 in the Drivers' Championship for the first time in his career. I'm taking Lando Norris.
Ooh, Lando. That's a good one. Yeah, it's P2. He's looking good. McLaren's looking good.
I think I gotta take one of the Mercedes in P2. Ferrari seems like they're extremely good in low-speed corners. They gain a lot of time there, but these last couple of races, Mercedes has shown they can fly. I'm going to take Mercedes. I'm going to take Lewis Hamilton. You know, it took him a long time to get that 198th podium. I think he's quick to get one more, put himself just one away from 200 career podiums.
Nice. It'd be great if he hits 200 this year. I think he will. Okay, you have Lando and Lewis. I've got Max. So in P2, I am going to give a surprise pick here because Red Bull looked good in Austria last year. Max is looking great this year. I'm going to go with Sergio. So a Red Bull 1-2.
Man, I think Red Bull's only something like 30 points ahead of Ferrari right now in P2. That would give them a nice boost if Sergio can figure it out next week.
It would, but my third pick, though, I'm going with Charles.
Ooh,
so it's going to be close. So I've got Max, Sergio, and Charles.
Very nice. Max, Sergio, Charles. I think that leaves the door open for me a little bit. I am going to take George Russell. I think he's been driving quite well so far this season. And then I will take the young fella, Oscar Piastri. You know, I think he has been doing a really good job in that McLaren, but he's sort of running into almost the, I guess, Albon situation when he sort of came up into Red Bull and had to drive against Max as a young driver. And Max was just so dominant in that car. He was so good. And Albon couldn't quite hang with him. I think Piastri, you know, he's driving well. I think we all know he's a really solid driver, belongs in F1, belongs on that team. But Lando right now is just absolutely crushing it and showing him up a little bit. But next week, Piastri, top 5.
Nice. So you've got 2 McLarens, Lando and Oscar. You've got 2 Mercedes, Lewis and George. I've got 2 Red Bull, Max and Sergio. So let's complete this. I've got Charles in third. We'll give Carlos this 4th spot, Carlos Sainz. And in 5th, let's see if we can, help the old man. I'm going to go with Fernando Alonso.
There you go. Fernando. He'll need a nap after that one.
All right. So I've got Max, Sergio, Charles, Carlos, and Fernando. And you have Lando, Lewis, George Russell, Oscar Piastri, and...
Damn. Well, all right. I'll give you my 5th. I will take Pierre Gasly, giving some good juju to the Alpine team there. But I just realized my top 3 is a British top 3.
Oh, yeah. You're right. How about that?
I think They got some good drivers in good cars right now. That is a humdinger right there.
Yeah, well, if something had happened to Max this week, we would have had a British top three, right?
Yeah, that's
Lando,
true.
Lewis, and George. So nice. Okay. Any crazy predictions, Patrick?
For Austria, I have one crazy prediction that Red Bull's home race will result in both cars getting retired and scoring no points. Actually, I think Austria has a sprint race too, right? I'm going to say Red Bull gets 0 points from the weekend, and Ferrari surpasses them in the championship.
Oh, wow. That is.
I don't even know if they're close enough to do that.
I don't think they are.
But I'm going with that. With the sprint too?
With the sprint, so how many points is that possible? 15 and then
So 25
maybe.
plus.
I follow
I
up on. I don't do that. I don't think I have an Austria crazy prediction. Logan Sargent is an embarrassing 2 points behind Alex Albon. That's how bad Logan Sargent is. He has only 0 points compared to 2 very big points for Alexander Albon. I think we all know Logan's days are numbered. And this weekend, I think it's just sort of getting to him. He's making mistakes in practice and qualifying that he should not. I think it's because he knows it's kind of over and he doesn't know what to do, give it his all. And so I don't think that's a crazy prediction. I think we all expect Logan to be out of F1 by the end of this year. It's a tough sport. I guess my crazy prediction is that Haas will be Haas and unceremoniously dump K-Mags. I think he's past his usefulness, but I think they're going to do something stupid rather than sort of thank him for his service, for him helping stabilize the team. I think they're going to do something stupid and announce some driver for next year in his seat without even letting him know first. And it just sort of leaks to the public and it's just terrible. So that's my crazy prediction.
Very nice. Very nice. But not very nice, I guess.
All right. I want to thank you all for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. And we are lights out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.
You just finished listening to Hard Compound, recorded in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and around the world.